Hi guys and welcome back to another video. If you are new to my channel, hi, my name's Ava and I'm a mortgage paraplanner. Now in today's video I actually want to cover off renting versus buying, and the reason for that is because I've personally always been pro buying and against renting because I've always seen it as a complete waste of money, and that's just me being honest. However, more recently I've been exposed to the other side of the argument in terms of seeing other people's opinions as to why they would actually prefer to rent rather than buy. And to be honest, now I understand both sides. As I say, personally I am still pro buying and I would still choose buying over renting. However, I now completely understand why certain people choose to rent rather than buy. But this video will cover off the benefits and drawbacks of buying a property, obviously, versus renting a property. So without further ado, let's jump right into the video. So I feel like in England, society tells us that there's three main life events that everybody should aspire to achieve within their lifetimes. And those three are getting married, having kids, and buying a house. Now let me tell you something. We live in the 21st century, guys, right? So if you don't want to do either of those three things, that is completely fine. Nobody can make you do any of those things. To be honest, I feel like they are all very old-fashioned, and as a society, we have moved on. You know, the new generation is completely different to the old one. I feel like the way we do things has changed and has evolved, and nowadays renting is not seen as chucking money away. There's actually quite a lot of advantages to it, but as I mentioned, personally I am more of pro buying rather than renting for my own personal reasons, and we'll discuss obviously the benefits and drawbacks in more detail shortly. There are various benefits as well as drawbacks to buying a property, so let's explore them a little bit further. Alright then, so let's start off with the benefits to owning your own house and to obviously buying a house. So number one is probably the most obvious, but it's the fact that once your mortgage is repaid, you will own that house. So the house is yours, all the equity within the house is yours, and nobody can take that away from you until you decide to sell. But ultimately, that is your money. So in a way, it's an investment, and to be honest, a lot of people do see it as an investment, which brings me on to benefit number two, and that's the possibility of your home actually increasing in value over the term of the mortgage or over the term that you have the house. The value is most likely going to increase. If you look back the early 2000s, houses were selling for 30-40 grand. It's unbelievable and unimaginable now. Obviously you have to take into account the likes of inflation and the fact that our salaries have increased as well. However, house prices have got the tendency of actually rising over a period of time rather than falling. But don't get me wrong, this is hugely dependent on other factors as well. So if, for example, you bought a house and then it flooded, it's a completely different scenario, as that would normally mean the value of the property would go right down, or it could even mean nobody would buy it or it's unmortgageable, which isn't something you want. So always make sure the property or the area around it doesn't flood, as you'd be surprised how common that is. But yeah, as I mentioned, the increase in value, that could be once again a really good investment. A lot of people actually use that to either sell the home and use that money towards buying a bigger home if that's what they want to do, or they use it to fund their retirement, normally by using a lifetime mortgage. However, they could also do that by downsizing, etc. But if you want to find out more about lifetime mortgages and equity release in general, I have actually made a separate video on that, so I'll link it down below and also up here for you to have a look at. Now number three is probably one of the main ones, one of the best ones in all fairness, and that's the fact that anytime you want to do anything to the property, property, you don't have to ask permission. Obviously providing, it's kind of decorative rather than anything structural, because, if you go down that rabbit hole, you need to seek permission from the council. However, if you want to do kind of interior design, change a few things, paint a few walls, change some carpets, whatever you want to do, you don't have to seek permission for that. However, when you're renting, it's a different story, because normally any major upgrades or whatever to the property, any major changes will have to be approved by your landlord. And also, if you do spend money on that house that you are renting, you're never going to see that money again. You're actually making somebody else's house a lot better. So unless you're planning to live in that house for the rest of your life, which, let's face it, is very unlikely, because even people who buy tend to move a lot, you are actually putting money in somebody else's pocket, which I personally wouldn't recommend. Also, a lot of landlords nowadays don't allow pets in their properties. I mean, I think it's completely silly, because, we all need a furry friend. I don't currently have one, but it's definitely on the cards at some point. However, if you are living in rented accommodation, a lot of the times you can't actually have a pet. So that's another downside to renting versus buying, because if you own your own home, you can get a dog if you want to get a dog. And the last benefit, and probably the most surprising, is the fact that when you put it all together, all the costs involved, if we spread it over a period of 25 years, which is probably the typical mortgage term, you will actually end up paying less on your mortgage than you would on rent. So just let that sink in for a while. Now, I'll pop up a graph that actually shows you how that works. Now, the figures do assume a few different factors, such as it assumes that you live in the same rented accommodation for the full 25-year period, which obviously is unlikely to be the case. It also assumes that interest rates will not go above 3%, which, to be honest, given the fact that the base rate is 0.1%, is not unrealistic, because if you think about it, it is very unlikely that the rates are going to rise dramatically anytime soon. And the main reason for that is if the government decided to raise the interest rates to massive levels, in effect it would literally crash the economy. So it's not something they can afford to do, so it's very unlikely to happen. But as I said, despite the fact that at the outset buying a house is a lot more expensive compared to renting, because when you go to rent a house, 9 times out of 10 you probably need about 2 months rent up front as a deposit, which on a normal property, let's take my house for an example. If I rented my house out, based on the size of it, I could get probably anywhere in the region of £550 to £600 per month. Now, when I bought my house, I had to put down a 10% deposit, so obviously that's a sizable chunk of money that you need to have saved up. So if I was renting this house, I'd only need about 1,200 quid. When I was buying the house, it was 10 times that amount. So, it's a lot more difficult to buy a property than it is to rent a property. However, it's worth it, because in the long run, it actually saves you money and you have that asset at the end of it. And just to put it into perspective with regards to actually looking at the mortgage and looking at the rent, as I said, for my house, I could probably get anywhere in the region of £550 to £600 every single month rent-wise. Whereas when it comes to my mortgage, I actually pay £313 a month, so almost half the amount I would have to pay if I was renting the place. So those were the benefits of buying rather than renting. But now let's go into the drawbacks, because unfortunately, there are a number of different drawbacks to buying a property rather than renting. So let's cover them off in more detail. So the first drawback I want to discuss is the fact that getting a mortgage in itself is a huge commitment. It's most likely going to be the biggest debt you'll ever have in your life. So you have to really think about it and make sure that you can actually afford it, because if you fall behind on your mortgage repayments, your house will be repossessed, and that is the last thing you ever want to go through. The second drawback is the fact that interest rates can go up and down. So despite fixed rates being the most popular interest rate type, type, your rate will only be fixed for either 2 or 5 years. So at the end of that period, it's very unlikely that you'll be able to get the exact same rate. A lot of the times you'll either get a higher rate or a lower rate, meaning that your monthly repayments will either go up or they'll go down. However, as I mentioned before, with the current climate and the interest rates being extremely low, it is very unlikely that you're going to notice a massive difference, because when interest rates do rise, they tend to do so gradually, so you'll be able to budget that into your spending. But it is something you need to be aware of, and it is something you need to prepare for as well. Now, number 3 is the fact that you may struggle to sell your home. Now, this could be for a variety of different reasons, but if, for example, you've decided, right, I'm gonna pack my stuff and move to Australia, and you've booked your ticket to fly out in 2 months' time, well, guess what? You're probably gonna struggle to sell your property in that space of time, because it does take time. You know, you'll have to find a buyer, you'll have to go through the whole selling process, which, you know, normally takes in the region to kind of 6 to 8 weeks, and you have to really take all of that into account. It's also quite costly, because you'll have estate agent fees and you'll also have legal costs to consider. So it's not as simple as packing your bags and going if you are having to sell your property. However, you may choose to rent it out instead, which would be my preferred option rather than selling. Now, number 4 is the fact that you are liable for all maintenance. So when you're renting a property, a lot of the times, if anything goes wrong, like the boiler breaks or anything like that, all you have to do is ring your landlord, tell them about the issue, and they'll get it sorted. However, when you own your own house, all of that's on you. Everything's on you. So you have to take that into account and normally set up like a maintenance fund or a sinking fund where you actually budget for those repairs, and because that's really important, because you never know when something's going to go wrong. And trust me, when you own your own house, something will go wrong. Now, number 5. Be careful who you buy the house with. So unless you're buying on your own, be very careful and make sure that the person that you are buying it with is the right person. Trust me, I know from my own experience, but we won't go into that in this video. One day I might tell you what happened. But the reason for that is, if things go wrong, if you split up, assuming it's a relationship, sorting a house out that's in joint names is not only time consuming and very stressful, but it's also very expensive. So it's the last thing you want to do. I mean, I would probably compare it to a divorce. Never been through a divorce, but I assume it's a very similar thing. So avoid it at all costs is my advice. Number 6 is the fact that you could experience negative equity, which is where you owe more on the house, so your mortgage is more than what the property is worth. And that could be, once again, due to a number of different reasons. One of them could be the fact that the market in general has crashed, so property prices all over the country are falling. Another one, once again, is, you know, if the property has flooded or there's been some landslip, anything like that that could affect the value of the property will do so, and you could be in a position where when you come to sell the property, you don't actually get the amount that you were hoping for. In effect, meaning that the outstanding mortgage on the property is actually more than what you sold it for. There's also less flexibility when you own the house, because once again, you know, if you want to pack your bags and move to Australia, it's not as easy as if you were renting, because normally when you rent a place, you know, you have your agreement, which normally lasts about 6 months, and at the end of that agreement, you can just hand the keys back and move on, which also has its downsides, by the way, so, you know, keep that in mind. But ultimately, you know, when you own your property, it's probably not as flexible as renting when you are looking to move around. So I probably wouldn't recommend buying if you are looking to move or travel quite a lot. And the last drawback is the fact that you have quite a lot of additional costs at the outset when you buy a property compared to renting it. So the likes of your stamp duty, money, if it's applicable, legal costs, obviously your deposit, which is the big chunk that you need to save up. All of those need to be taken into account when you are looking to buy a house. And if you want to know more as to how I saved for a house deposit, I will link my video down below and also up here as well for you. So that is it for today's video, guys. I hope you found it useful and it's given you some things to think about when deciding whether you want to rent or whether you want to buy. As I say, personally, I would always go for buying, but that's because I've already bought my house. I know it can be difficult to save up for a house deposit. However, if you are truly committed to buying a house, you will find a way. If I managed to buy my house at 21, so can you. So with that being said, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and also subscribe to my channel and help me hit 1,000 subscribers by the end of 2021. Thank you for watching and I'll see you guys back on Monday with a brand new video. Bye guys!